house, and they're going to get advice from their cousin, their brother, their sister, their coworker, their grandparents who haven't bought or sold a house in years. And one of the things when we talked about qualifying buyers, and I'm sure Rajiv, if he agrees to do our buyer agent interview, he'll tell you the same thing. You have to let people know up front that they're going to get advice from a lot of different people about how to buy and sell a house. And in most cases, those people haven't bought or sold a house in 15 or 20 years. So they're not familiar with the process. They only get information what they hear on the radio or what they see on TV about the market. And you can just tell them to say, thank you very much, that's great. I already have an agent and I'll ask them questions. So to try to not get advice from other people, and don't listen to those other people's advice because what they tell you may not be reality because they don't do it every day like you do, and it's not their profession. And if you have questions, they can come to you, and if you don't have the answer, you'll come to me or the managing broker of your office or your dad or whoever, right? Or your team leaders. So keep that in mind because they're going to get bad advice. The advice they get from other people is very rarely relevant or good, or they might get advice from a part-time agent at the office that doesn't sell that many houses. So just keep that in mind. That's a good expectation, but those are some of the things that people hear all the time. So anyway, what we're going to do today, we're going to write a contract. Has anyone written a contract besides a shoe?
One.
You did?
Before I stopped here.
Okay. So what I like to do, as Melissa knows, Larissa knows, is I like to have MRS open because you want to go back and forth. Unfortunately, right now, MRS does not sync with Dotloop. Hopefully, it's going to soon, so that'll save you guys a lot of time. But so when you go into Dotloop, you're going to create a loop, okay? And they like you to use the address or the MLS number, okay? So let's go in, and does somebody have an address that they'd want to write a contract on? What's your address?
129.
129
61.
61.
Jordan Gate. TOLY.
There it is. Okay. So this is under mine. I'll archive it later. So what you're going to want to do is you want to come down here and you want to add from templates. Okay. And we're going to do an NVAR purchase. So it has all the stuff that you're going to need for writing a contract on a resale house. Typically, okay. So if you have a house that's sale of home contingency, then you'll just have to add another form to it. But hopefully you already have your exclusive right to represent buyer signed, so we won't go to that. But you have the residential sales contract, conventional financing, and we don't need to worry about web-based paint because your house wasn't built then. And then a home inspection contingency, and let's say we're buying a RE/MAX gateway listing. And let's say we are going to sell your house, a townhouse, to buy it. So you copy those over, and you say okay. Now typically, residential sales contract has the most information to fill out, and it auto-populates everything else. So I open that one first. And you can also move these around if you didn't know, to put them in whatever order you guys wanted to put them in. Okay? Any question on that so far? No? All right. So we'll go and we'll open up the residential sales contract. And, whoops, I got ahead of myself. Down here, you're going to want to add people. So then your role is going to be the buyer. And then you can put in all the information here, so we'll just say 123 Main Street. Because what's going to happen is the more information you fill in here, the more it's going to auto-populate the contract, buyer agent agreement, and all those things later. Okay? So 123 Main Street. And Fairbanks. Oops, came up first. 2202. And then you put in their phone number if you want. And then we'll add in a person. We'll go to Paul. Totally wrong, by the way. This information. And he'll be the seller. And what was your address again?
Mine, 12961,
1296
Tory, Gate Court.
Tory
Gate Court.
Gate. And you add that person, and then I'm going to add myself. Oh, I did it. And I'll be your buyer agent. So you'll see it takes a while to write a contract. How long does it take you usually, Paul?
To write a contract, at least an hour, but I'm usually sitting with the purchasers, is that what you're talking about?
Mhm.
And they have a lot of questions, so that an hour is kind of quick for me. I've had to take 2.5 hours with their engineers. They read
Yes.
every single thing.
So that's a very good point, Paul. And what is a good thing to do when you work with people? How much time do you spend in the car with them?
Oh, well, I spend quite a bit of time when we're looking for homes.
Right.
And I do spend that time talking to them about what
The
we're going to be doing.
Yes. And so what's sometimes good, depending on how many times you're meeting with these people, is to have a copy of a contract and say, hey, while we're driving to the next house, let's go ahead and let's review the contract, because you're going to be signing one of these later today.
That's great.
Right. And so what you guys should do, and ladies should do, is you should read the contract 100 times so that you know what the contract says. Because there's going to be, and you should be able to sit there. When I do a contract, when we used to handwrite them and people sign them, I would sit there and look at the people's eyes all the way through and say what each paragraph was. And so that builds the confidence in you from their standpoint to build trust. And a great time to read the sales contracts are when you're doing open houses and you're sitting there and nobody's coming in. And same thing with the listing agreement, contingency clauses, addendums. So just make yourself up a little book and then highlight and ask so that you can ask me questions later or ask, your Penny or whomever. And then it's good to put in the license. 576. And then that's your MRS ID number. Okay? Now, a couple of things. We're gonna do one more person and we'll do Paul Hunter. Paul at HunterSellsHomes.com. And he's going to be the listing agent, right? you put, oh yeah, I probably didn't put the company name in, did I? So one of the things that I'm a stickler on is I'm a stickler on having the contract filled out in its entirety. And what I mean by that is knowing what the other listing agent or the other buyer agent's information is in MRIS and then DPOR, okay? So we will put in Paul's last name. Has everybody been here before? Okay, so you go into the roster, you put in their name, and then it'll give you the results of Paul. And there's his MRIS ID number that we're gonna go in and put on the Dotloop paperwork here. Okay? And I'm gonna come back to that in a second. The other one is DPOR. Okay? And DPOR, you wanna do license lookup. Has anyone done this before?
Yep.
Okay, so we're gonna put in Paul's name, Paul Hunter. And wrote Paul Arthur Hunter right there. So there is his real estate license number. Wow, he has a crazy number. Pretty good there with all those ones. I wonder if he's played the lottery with those numbers. Now, the reason I fill all this stuff out is in case you're in a competing situation, you can tell the other agent that you pay close attention to all the details. If you notice on the contract, I've already put in your company name, I put in your MRIS ID number, I put in your license number, and your firm's license number. So that way, they, you know, if you have somebody else, some of the stuff might not be filled in completely. If you have a problem with, if they don't fill out the contract completely in the beginning, you may run into problems later with them missing important details and important dates. You can also say it to your client too. Say, look, I pay attention to all the details here that not all agents do. It's a little extra step to make sure that everyone's covered, right? So we had that. The other thing that you can do is license lookup. I have not done this yet, but I'm imagining I can. Put in Remax Gateway. Yep, so there it is. So then there's the firm license number. So we'll need that firm license number later because it doesn't have it in Dotloop, but it is on the contract now. So I'm gonna have to tell them about that, okay? Now, the one thing that's always good to do is on here, let's go back to Paul. Is you go down here and you can see any disciplinary action against Paul. You can see if you're dealing with a straight shooter or someone who has had issues in the past or ongoing. Cemetery investments.
So it sounds like a sideline.
Oh, yeah, it could be a part-time job. You know what, it may not come up. You just want to know, again, part of your due diligence in working with your clients. Last update, then. His continuing education. You can see he's done a lot of his continuing education, so he's up to date on that stuff. There's our firm license. So I would say down here there's no indication that he's had any disciplinary actions. wish I knew that, but anyway, that part's good. Over here, what you'll do is you'll go in and you'll search them the last 365 days to see how busy he's been, right? And has everybody added fields down below? So these are fields that you're going to use a lot. So a listing broker code, if you want to find out, if the company's doing a lot of business or not. Put a listing agent ID, you can put that in there. So any fields like elementary school, people want to be in an elementary school district or a high school district, because that's not above the line here, that's going to be something that you're going to want to use a lot. Some people want a certain model. Some people want to be close, within a mile of a metro or something like that. So, somebody doesn't want new construction. If you want to do stuff that needs work or need rehab, so you can add all these fields.
Can I ask a question though?
Mm-hmm.
Can that kick out your search easily if the agent hasn't put that in about that particular property? If you're looking
Correct.
for properties?
Yeah. So, come in here, and you can see Paul has sold 10 listings in the last year. And then you come over here to stats, and then you go to group by price. So you can reverse the math here, right? 3.95 million divided by 3.6 million. He negotiates pretty well for his clients, right? So he's sold 10 houses, that's good for 10 listings. So it's just good information to have on what the other agent does or doesn't do or how they negotiate. We put in Ron Rush's name, he gets like 90.7%. So what is your address here?
12961.
12961. Yep, I remember that part. 48. So since it's not listed, we're not going to know what conveys in the house and stuff like that, but you have all the information that you're going to need here for a good portion of the contract. Okay. So we have all those things. So you come in and go to the residential sales contract. And you want to come over here, autofill, and you want to say yes. That way everything gets filled in for as much that can be filled in. So the date is today. By between Jennifer Scaff and Paul Mandel, and then the listing broker, Remax, Gateway, and Remax Gateway. And then we represent, since we represent the buyer and seller, there's a separate form. So you don't check represents the buyer, represents seller. Where this will come into play is if it's your listing and you sell it to someone who's an unrepresented buyer, you would check that you represent the seller in this instance, right? And then that way you can still collect both sides of the commission. So that's what you guys would do. And then if it's an unrepresented seller, then you put that you represent the buyer, okay? But if it's, Long and Foster and Remax Gateway, then you would represent the buyer here, okay? Any questions on that? Okay. So up here at the top, here's your tax ID number. So if you have a good memory, you can memorize it, or you can just copy and paste and put that in. That's the beginning. And then lot number is 48 in section 17. Lot 48. 17. And we are in Piedmont. I always spell it wrong. P-E-I?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then no parking places. Where parking spaces are important is when you're in a condominium or townhouse. And it's really important in a condominium when there's a garage parking space. Because sometimes people will sell garage spaces separately from the sale of the condo. So you definitely want to verify what that is, okay? The other thing that I was telling Larissa and Brad earlier is you want to do your deed, LIBOR, and your folios. That would be LIBOR and page number, okay? And so the other one is easy. We will put in that. So right over here, the LIBOR number is 2004. And Larissa, why is this important?
Does that help you check with the loan?
What's that?
Is that something with the loans?
No. So it's with the title company. So the title company is going to research the property by the tax ID number, the street number, and they'll go to the deed book and the page number and look and make sure that all the liens that are against the house are going to get paid off. So this makes the title company's job a little bit easier. Now, in here, this is where you put in the financing. You met with, we did Josh last week, right? So we'll say it's an FHA loan. So FHA loan have what loan to value?
3.5% down.
3.5% down. Okay? So then you that'd make your first trust 96.5%. And then there's no second financing. There's no seller held financing. So your total financing is going to be 96.5%. The reason that these were put in versus just these numbers is when you counter contracts, you have to go back and change all those numbers over and over and over and over again. Since we're going to lowball Jennifer and Jen, we're going to have a lot of negotiations back and forth. And then you have your sales price. So what's the maximum loan amount for FHA?
96.5%.
No, what's the maximum loan amount?
625.
625.5. So let's offer her 620. Did
That's
anybody?
not good.
The market's down. Okay, so the buyer's going to obtain a fixed rate, amortized over 30 years, and it's at a rate not to exceed 3.5%. Okay? That information is going to be information that you're going to glean from your loan officer. Okay? Now, the reason that you put this in and put these in is that is then becomes specified financing. Okay? Actually, let's change this. Let's make this a conventional one because I have conventional financing addendum in there. So we keep it all consistent. Okay, so that becomes specified financing in the contract. If someone tries to change financing and they get declined, then they would be considered in default. Okay, so that's why it's important to have that when you're representing our buyer, but also when you're representing a seller, you want to make sure all this information is in there. And then we have a conventional financing addendum. If it's cash, then you'd use, this is not contingent on financing. And you could also put cash in there if you wanted to put that in. So, way back when, 2005, 2006, you could do an 80-20. We had an 80% first trust, 20% second trust. Second trusts really aren't that popular right now. But again, if they were to get a second trust to avoid having to pay PMI, then they would put the information on the second trust there. And we really don't see a lot of assumptions. That's where you take over somebody's existing loan. So on here, we're going to have a check, and it's going to be the earnest money that the people are putting up. And typically, what we want to do is we want to put in 1 to 3% of the sales price. Okay? So in this instance, the sales price was $620. You might want to do $6,500 as an earnest money deposit. If you're in a competitive situation, and in this situation they're putting down 5%, that's $30,000, you might want to put down a $25,000 earnest money deposit to make their contract look stronger. But typically, it's 1 to 3%. Okay? If you're coming in with a low ball offer, then you want to come up with a bigger deposit like the 3%. So we'll say that we're going to put in $15,000. What's also important here when you're with your clients and you're talking about their cash, if you recall, we said that you need to make sure that they make their money available. So you have to let them know that this money is going to be deposited when the contract is ratified. Okay? And then we typically don't like to do notes, but if you were to do a note and it was $15,000, it's due and payable August 1st because they had to liquidate a 401k or they had to liquidate an IRA or something like that, that's when you would use a note. But because you're going to talk to them in advance to make that money available before you go look at houses and things, they should have that money available. Now here, you have options. Number one is Remax Gateway holds the deposit, which is 90% of the time, right? Paul, have you ever had anybody else hold the escrow?
No.
Okay.
For my buyers, we've always held it,
Yeah.
every single time.
There are some agents that want the title company to hold the escrow, which is fine. I would not use the listing company's escrow account. I would use ours. So it's either going to be the title company or us is what you're going to put in there. All right? And then
Get paid faster too.
all right, because we transfer it from escrow over. So the buyer has delivered to the escrow agent, which would be us, or will deliver. So if you are like Paul and you're sitting there and you're writing your contract with the people, remind them to bring their checkbook. But so you want to say that they have already delivered the check. Okay. Now, basically what happens here with the escrow is that gets placed in our escrow account and it gets dispersed in a couple different ways. One is by closing, so that money gets credited towards our down payment closing costs at time of settlement. The next way is by mutual release of all the parties. And that would come up like if there was a problem with the home inspection or the property owners association documents or something along those lines. By court order, if there's a dispute that arises out of transaction and we interpolate the money to the courts would decide. Or the last way would be if I write a letter and say, if you don't respond whether you're going to release the money or not, and you have an issue with us releasing the money, you have to let me know within 30 days. And if they don't let me know within 30 days, then I can release the money back to the buyer. So those are the ways that the money gets released from the escrow account. And that's basically what all of this says right here. Okay? Typically on the closing dates, they are anywhere from 30 to 60 days. If you're writing a contract today, you would probably close when?
30 days from now? End of August?
End of August.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you just look at a calendar and talk to your clients about it, see if they're going to be in town or if they're going to be back for vacation on that day. A lot of people like to close the last Friday of the month, so the title companies could be really busy and the lenders could be really busy. So, if you wanted to, you close on August 31st, but just see what everybody's time frame is and how quickly the lender can act and so forth. So this paragraph is bolded here, which says that the buyer has the right to choose the settlement company. Okay? The seller cannot dictate to the buyer in Virginia who uses the title company or which title company the buyer uses. A lot of times relocation companies and foreclosure, whether they're owned by a bank or an REO asset manager, will try to have you use their title company. you can go in and you can put that on the contract so that our client gets the contract, and then a week later send over a notice to the contract that the buyer's changing title companies. So the buyer has the right to make that decision of who they're going to use. That's what that paragraph says. So in here, they're going to use a specific title company, whoever you want to use. Walker Title does a good job, so I'll put in Walker Title. If the buyer doesn't know of anybody, they have 10 days to make a decision on who they're going to use. But typically, you're going to use someone that you're comfortable with and that you feel good using. You have to remind them that the down payment needs to be in certified funds or cashier's check where they can wire the money to the title company. Never email the wiring instructions. Always have them call the title company and have the title company give them the wiring instructions so that their information's not out there. There's a lot of fishers on the internet and on emails. So delivery is a very important part of the contract. That's how you're going to get information from the sellers if you're the buyer agent, or how you're going to deliver information to the buyer if you're the seller's agent. Typically, what I like to do on here is I like to put my email address, not my sellers or my buyers. And the reason is I want to see what's being delivered. If it's notice to void the contract, if it's HOA docs, I want to review the HOA docs before they do, so I can see if the budget's in line, if there's any special assessments coming up, if the property's in violation of any architectural review board guidelines, anything along those lines. And when you explain that to your clients that you're the one that wants to get it first, then they're typically good with that. You'll see a lot of times buyers want to, or other agents want you to send stuff directly to their buyer. I just think that's a bad idea. If you're representing somebody, you should be the one that's looking at the information first and explaining to them what it means. The other thing is, Paul has an elderly client. You have to make sure of what you're doing here, because you're going to have, it's by United States mail to her, right?
Or me driving, it's really me driving
to
to.
carrying it. So this is important to have these boxes checked, okay? Where you can check all that apply. You can put the seller's address and your email address, or however you want to do that, okay? Any questions on that? Because this is an important part of the contract delivery.
Can you put multiple emails?
You can put multiple emails, so that's not a problem. All that apply, okay? So anyway, if you go and you void a contract and you email it to the listing agent, and their email is not in there, you have not made proper delivery on the contract. And so your buyer could be in default if you're representing a buyer and you want to get out of the contract. So
You say that again?
So you want to, let's say that they have, like in Paul's instance, it's US mail to the seller, and you email Paul the release of the contract and voiding the contract, that is not delivery, because it doesn't go to where it states in here. So if your buyer goes past that deadline, Paul's like, sorry, you screwed up, you're under contract. You know, we want your deposit if you want to get out of the contract now. So you want to make sure, this is, a lot of agents don't fill this in, is that correct, Paul?
Absolutely.
And so you want to make sure that you affirmatively put in what is easiest for you, and what's easiest for you is the buyer agent's email address or the seller agent's email address. All right? Very important part of the contract.
Can I add one thing?
Of course.
You really need to pay attention to the part for the other side, because sometimes they put in that they want it sent to the agent and also to the seller, the homeowner, or the buyer, depending on what side you represent. And if you only send it to the agent and you don't send it to the owner or the purchaser, then you're still in, you didn't just say this, did you?
Mhm.
And then you're in default then too.
That's why he just asked if you could put multiple addresses in. I
Yeah.
said yes.
Yeah, so you gotta really pay attention. You gotta send every single thing to both of them,
Right.
so, yeah.
So you want to make sure, because that, we do not want to put our clients in jeopardy of being in default by not having this information. And the other thing is, if you don't check it for the seller, it's the property address. Okay? So if nothing for the seller, you have to hand carry it, overnight it, or mail it to them. Okay? And where this can become a problem is where the property is vacant. So you don't really want to rely on that information. Okay?
Is it typical to put 2 emails?
Usually it's just it'll be the listing agent, and they don't like to give out their seller's information, but a lot of times you'll see the buyer agent and the 2 buyers. I don't do that because, first of all, I don't want to give my email address to the other agent, because you don't know what they're going to do with that email. If they're going to try and capture them and then try and steal them as a client later. But again, I don't want my buyers getting something, and let's say I'm in this meeting now and they get a void. They're probably on the phone buzzing me 100 times while I'm in this meeting and I can't respond to them, and they're freaking out. So that's why I want to get it before they get it. You don't put your clients in there, do you, Paul?
No.
No. Not now.
More.
Right, that'll be more.
Not that you said that.
So, Residential Property Disclosure Act, this basically says that the property is going to sell in as-is condition, and that the seller makes no representations or warranties concerning the physical condition of the property. And there's going to be a disclosure statement attached to the contract. If the buyer does not receive it prior to 3 days after delivery of the disclosure statement, they can void the contract. So that's why it's important when you're a listing agent that you have the disclosure statement signed in NMRES so the selling agent can download it and have it signed. Because you don't want to leave an opening for someone to get out of a contract. Now typically people won't void the contract because they don't have a disclosure statement. They'll void a contract because of HOA docs or the home inspection or something along those lines. But it's very important to know that if someone's going to terminate it, it needs to be hand delivered, sent by U.S. mail,